Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our training on evidence-based practices. We are very glad to see you all here. And without further delay, we are off and running. My name is Steve Miller. I am the director at the Mid-America PTTC, the Prevention Technology Transfer Center. And Dave already said when he finally got situated that there were a lot of familiar faces in the audience. So I know that a lot of you probably know Dave as my predecessor here at the Mid-America PTTC. And it's good to have him back in the seat, so to speak, and providing the training for us today. And I'll let him introduce his co-presenter with him when we get to that point. But suffice it to say, we're glad that you're here today. Welcome in, everyone. And we're off and running. Next slide, please there, Dave. So, like I said, we are the PTTC for Mid-America, and we are here to build a strong community so that we can navigate any crisis, because I just love this, and I give full credit to Mr. Clausen. Actually, Dave, we never talked about that. Were you the one that came up with Better Together, We Are Stronger? Or are you the one that coined that, or did you snag that from the ether worlds?
So the together is better was inspired from the ether world, but I added the prevention is better together.
Prevention is better. Well, either way, we're glad that you're here. We are part of ACT Missouri's lineup. ACT Missouri has been in the business of grassroots prevention initiatives for the past 30 years. And they are located in Jefferson City, Missouri, and we're here to build the community. And we do that by using affirming language to inspire hope. And we believe that language matters because words do have power. And we strive in everything we do to put people first. The PTTC network uses affirming language to promote the application of evidence-based and culturally informed practices. And a couple of things we want to let you know about. I'll put a link in the chat as we get things moving forward. But this Thursday, over the noon hour, we have the next installment of our community of practice, which is part of the Leadership Institute. And we'll be talking about workforce development. And I'll put that link in the chat if you'd like to register for that event coming up this Thursday. And then the DEC Connect, which is another community of practice that we offer in collaboration with the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. And we will be discussing some of their offerings around the DEC Academy and their new DEC Academy 2.0. And we'll have that discussion. And we'd like to invite you into that on August the 24th. And I'll drop a link in the chat here in just a little bit as well. I think everyone's pretty much an old hand when it comes to Zoom, but if you do have some technical issues, please reach out to myself or Dave or Nicole as we're moving through this, and we'll try to accommodate as best that we possibly can. And Dave will provide any necessary guidance on any of the functions that he will be using throughout this particular training. Suffice it to say that I know it's a very dynamic offering, so get in, sit down, hold on, because here we go. And the last thing you will see appear on the screen at the end of the training is our ever-present GIPRA, which is a way for us to measure outcomes from the particular events that we offer. And we would like to have you indulge us in just a few moments at the conclusion of this training to fill out the GIPRA form. We'll put the QR code back on the screen, and we'll also provide a hyperlink in the chat, whichever one works best for you. But you'll see that return at the end of this event. So thanks again for being here today. Thanks for your patience in helping us to get this thing started. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
All right. Yes. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all back. I know some of you did attend session 1. Welcome to session 2, where we're going to take a little deeper look into the process of finding the right evidence-based program or practice for your community's needs. And if you know me, I like to have conversations. So don't think of this session as your traditional or typical webinar. This is a straight up conversation. I know there's a lot of wisdom in this room, And I hope you all will share some of your insights, your lessons learned with each other, with us as well, because prevention is better together. A little bit about myself, then I'll turn it over to my lovely co presenter, Nicole, as well. Dave Clausen, I got my start in prevention as a police officer at Eastern Illinois University, and it did not take me long to realize the impact alcohol and other drugs would have on how I did my job as a campus cop. And I got to thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be great if the students, didn't drink so much? Next thing I know, the Health Education Resource Center is like, well, duh, Dave, that's called prevention science, and evidence based prevention strategies. And for that moment on, I was all in on prevention. And yes, most recently, sitting over there in the seat that Steve is sitting in right now, doing an amazing, amazing job. What I do now is I work at DJC Solutions, my own consulting company that really just strives to connect individuals and organizations to their optimal performance and really helping lift folks up in the moment and empower you all to pursue and achieve real change, helping you all reach that next level of excellence. And without further ado, I'd like to just invite Nicole to share a little bit about your incredible prevention background as well.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks so much for inviting me to be here today. Hi, everybody. I recognize some of your names and faces, which is just a delight. Years ago, I worked for the former Center for the Application of Prevention Technologies in Kansas and Nebraska, were two of the states that I had under my belt. So absolutely loved that time, learned a ton. Like Dave, I'm incredibly passionate about prevention and have built almost a 13-year career around prevention and prevention best practices. I've now landed at the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention. So they have graciously let me volunteer my time to join Dave for the remainder of this series. And thanks so much, for having me. I will say I'm also counting my blessings that I am sitting in an air-conditioned office in the desert in Arizona, right where I live. So little different than the Midwest here, but would love to hear more about your communities as we go on today and then in our future session 3. So thanks for having me.
Yes, I am honored to be presenting alongside you, Nicole. We had worked together a while back in Texas many years ago. It was a blast. But, all right, folks, here's what we're doing today. We're going to do a quick recap for those that weren't able to join us in session 1, but I do believe the recording is up on the website now if you want to go back and catch that. We're going to talk about what's going to happen for intervention success. And after you go out and you search for your EBPs, what next? And then what are those core components of an EBP that you have to deliver with fidelity as well? That's what we're going to do today, but in good fashion, because we do believe that prevention is better together and we want to build community. We're going to put you in just real quick breakout, small groups, 3 to 4 people. Would love for you to just introduce yourselves and just share what's a favorite fall time activity. And I put fall on there because it here in Indiana is just around the corner. Like I can just see it on the horizon and I'm excited. So it's going to be a real quick breakout because, prevention is so better together. We'll see you back here in just a few moments.
Dave, there was a question about receiving a copy of the slides. Do you want to
Yes.
PDF those and when we're done? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, that there was a comment about that.
Yes.
Wonderful.
You gave me the slides last week too, didn't you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can send
Yeah,
you again if
you want me to do you think it would be helpful if I put a link for last week's event in the chat as well? It's on the I posted it on the YouTube page.
We can put those links in at the end. Okay. I've had people open YouTube videos during and starts playing and flash.
That's what I was just thinking. Yeah.
Well, I thought we were, I think we're being cursed by either Zoom or well, in this case, Zoom, but I've already had some people message me that they're not even getting notification that they're registering for this event. So there's something happening between our Zoom and our constant contact. And I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a computer thing. I don't know if it's a constant contact thing, a Zoom thing, but somehow or another, it's not all working seamlessly.
That's frustrating.
Yeah.
Because we had like 9 people last week that
Mhm.
couldn't get in using the link that came in their like registration,
Confirmation.
but it's the same link. I emailed them the exact same link and they got in.
Yeah.
So there's something that's not. And I went and checked everything, but I don't know who to start with. Like, do I try to contact someone at Constant Contact and they can look it on the back end? Maybe I'm going to have to do one or the other,
Yeah.
because I don't know if it's happening with other events like our communities of practice.
Hmm. Sometimes folks would say the constant contact confirmation email would go to their spam folder
Yeah.
and they wouldn't get it. But I don't know what's happening with the folks where that link is just not working that when they do
Yeah.
get it. That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
I had people the reminder went out this morning, and I had people that were logging on to the Zoom right then, like such and such
Yeah.
has joined your training, such and such. I was like, no, not
Mhm.
yet.
They're that excited.
So I
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah. It's all right. We will, what is it? The show must go on. We got this.
So, Dave, real quick, I was just
Yeah.
looking at the breakout rooms. It looks like there's 3 to 4 people a room.
Are
So
you
we've got a
doing
total.
math?
What?
Are you doing math?
No, I'm literally just looking. But we do have 8 separate rooms, so a little different than kind of what we were
Oh,
thinking about
I'll
for the.
recreate them.
Okay.
I dialed back the time for the breakouts because we were behind schedule. So I did smaller groups. That way everybody could still talk.
Okay. I
Yeah.
was thinking if you wanted to keep them as they are, we could just do 2 of each for, case studies, whatever you want to do.
I say let's recreate them because those groups that have 3, if we lose somebody, then just 2.
Yeah.
I'll recreate them to 5. That's all right.
Great.
Yeah. Easy peasy.
Well, they're here.
Well,
Yeah,
we're
this
making
is
it
really
happen.
weird. I'm looking through emails that people sent, and they're like, I don't find the registration link.
Oh no.
Has this been canceled?
Oh, what a bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come hang out with us.
But it just makes you wonder how many people just give up. You know what I mean? We got 30 here, which is what we had last week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I
they
don't know.
haven't missed anything so far. If folks want to hop in, it's not too
Yeah.
late.
The live transmission.
This last 30 seconds to top off my water.
There we go.
Record. All right. Hopefully you made some new connections there. The start of some new prevention friends. Who knows, maybe even a cross-state collaboration. So as we jump into it, would love for you to drop your name and just where you're joining us from in the chat box as well, please. Because I could not be in all 8 breakout rooms at the same time as much as I wanted to be and tried. But all right. So favorite fall time activity as well. I love it. I just love being outdoors. Love being outdoors in the colors. All right. So now the recap. What do we remember about evidence-based practices? All right. Y'all didn't know there was going to be a pop quiz here today. But don't worry. I will be the one taking the quiz. You guys will just be observing. All right, so if you remember, EBPs, they can be located in a federal registry of evidence-based interventions. They can also be in peer-reviewed journals with those desirable effects. on the primary targeted outcome. And then also they can have just that documented evidence that's supported by other sources of information and the consensus judgment of informed experts. Also, want to mention we also unpacked the definition of program and practice. So, a program is a set of predetermined, structured, and coordinated activities. Now, a practice is a type of approach, technique, or strategy. A program can incorporate different practices, and guidance for implementing a specific practice can be developed and distributed as a program. Clear as mud. Yes, but then evidence based, of course, they have that documented evidence of effectiveness. And then EBPs, gosh, they are very desirable because they're more likely to yield those outcomes we want. With a quick little caveat that EBPs got to be selected that is appropriate for that focus population domain and implemented with fidelity to the core components. Boop. More on that later today. But also EBPs, they've been done before. There's likely going to be guidance, resources to support your planning and your implementation of that EBP. And just like Together is Better, you can likely find other prevention practitioners that have implemented that EBP for a little peer support, a little peer learning as well. All right. That last bullet, though, your program is easier to sell. Definitely a tenet of sustainability. When your program is aligned with the public health approach, when others have done it and you can reach those desirable outcomes, it can make it easier to engage stakeholders, to build their buy-in, to build their support, ultimately leading to sustainability as well. They can produce those quick wins and instill that commitment towards long-term impact on your practices and policies within the community. And I remember a few folks, this really caught their eye. Those EBPs are going to be most effective when they match the 4 R's of capacity. And yet again, I still feel compelled to make a pirate joke when I say the 4 R's, but I will withhold. But you do want to make sure they're aligned with your resources, your community's level of readiness, any restrictions, and also requirements. Also, those EBPs have got to match the needs of the community. They've got to match, they've got to align as well for them to be most effective. And we'll get into this a little bit more later today as well. All right, Nicole.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so let's talk about what we need to know before selecting EBPs. So piggybacking off of everything that was covered in session 1, which if you were not in attendance last week, you will have an opportunity to view that recording and check out those materials after today. So you can always go back, right, and share with your staff. But before we go into selecting EBPs and going into our activity to really apply what we do, we need to know quite a bit about our community, right? We know that using evidence-based practices, programs, or policies are incredibly advantageous if those EBPs that are selected are appropriate for your community, the focus population, and you have the capacity to actually implement them and implement them well, right? So before selecting EBPs, we need to know what those community needs are, and we need to know what your 4 R's are. Right? So let's go on to talk about the SPIF. Many of you are incredibly familiar with the strategic prevention framework that comes out of SAMHSA and has been our guiding framework in the field of prevention for well over a decade now. For very good reason. It works, it is evidence-based, and it provides some really great guidance, not step-by-step direction. That's up to you, but really great guidance to walk through these different phases and get the information complete the tasks that you need to complete to lead to successful implementation, and of course, sustainability. So let's talk about the SPIF for just a second. It's worth going into, it's worth reviewing. We need to work on the assessment step and the capacity step before we're selecting any of our evidence-based prevention programs, and really before we're implementing. And that's because we're striving for that appropriate fit, right? We want to make sure our programming fits what we have and what we need. So we work through assessment and capacity to identify those pieces. And it's so, so, so important to know not just what problem you want to target, but your risk and protective factors, the community context before you're choosing your strategies. You're going to have the largest impact if you know not just what your issue is, right? But if you know why that issue is occurring in certain age groups or subsets of the population or in particular settings. So if you know that easy access to prescription drugs is a problem in your community, right? Like that's a prevalent risk factor driving non-medical use of prescription drugs among youth, then there's way more questions that come from that. Is it because doctors are overprescribing? Not so much the case anymore because of the work in prevention and public health. But are young adults sharing prescriptions? If youth already know that misusing prescription drugs is incredibly risky, especially with psychostimulants, which is becoming a hot trend, if they already know that that risk is very high and they already believe that that is a problem, but the use is still happening, then you know that a communication campaign to build risk is not going to work. Youth already know that, right? So it's all about getting a really full picture to allow your planning of a successful implementation. The SPIF sets you up for success. So change really comes from knowing the whole story. And what helps you move through these steps of the SPIF process, and what will help you today as we talk about selecting, finding really quality EVPs, is use of a logic model. So we're going to do a quick little poll here, a quick little reactions poll. So in the bottom of your screen of your Zoom window, there's a little reactions button. I want to see different reactions depending on how much you love logic models or are familiar with them. If you love them, you use them frequently, you depend on them, I want to see confetti reactions. If you've had some experience with logic models, you see their place, I want a smiley face. If you've heard of logic models, maybe you know that you need to use one, but you haven't really created one before, they seem intimidating, give me a little thumbs up. And then raise your hand if logic models feel pretty new, distant, something that your evaluator does, something you pay somebody else to deal with, right? Give me just a raise your hand. Okay, reactions time. Dave, how are we looking? Are you seeing any reactions across the board here?
Yes, we've seen some confetti. We've seen some thumbs up, some smiley faces, and Emma, I see you're off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you just go over what the 4 were one more time? Because I totally got lost.
Yes, they are also in the chat box. But
Oh, perfect.
Confetti if you love them, smiley face if you've had some experience with them, thumbs up if you've heard of them but never used one, and then raise your hand if it's a new concept to you. Yeah, you've got a pretty good mix here, Nicole.
Melissa, I have to acknowledge the emoji that you chose and to say that I fully appreciate it. It was a little side smile. So feel free to use your own too to kind of represent your feelings around logic models. But we have a nice little representation across the board of level of familiarity and and like of using them. So let's dive in. We want to show you a winning format for logic models. This will be very familiar looking, a little tweaked, a little bit more specific, and we'll go into that in a second. But this will be very familiar to those of you who have been through the substance abuse prevention skills training or a similar type of training. Some of you in here are SAPST trainers, so you have probably seen this format before, and it has stuck around because it really works. It's easy to convert into an Excel or to use graphically. And so we're going to use this today and kind of walk through each of these different components and talk about why they're so important to know before you get to your strategy piece. You'll notice that the first 3 chunks here come from completing a very comprehensive needs assessment. And that is why that's the first step of the SPIF. We need to go through the needs assessment piece and the capacity assessment piece to be able to begin filling out our logic model before we can start making decisions and move over into planning. So we're going to break down each of these sections. Let's dive into the problem and related behaviors box. Now, truthfully, our problems are usually prescribed to us, right? Like we have a funder who's received funding, usually from the feds or our own agency. We secured funding from a grant we wrote 8 months ago, and the grant particularly targeted an issue. And that funder or that grant, they've already conducted their own needs assessment warranting why they're targeting it on that problem. Okay, so we know like Partnership for Success, for instance, those grants, they focus on underage drinking and then sometimes some additional targeted substances that you can address as well. So problems are usually predicted for us, I would say, but it's still important to know your consequence data. It's still important to know how these problems are showing up in your community as local as possible, right? You want to get as localized data as possible. County level data is usually available to us thanks to data collection efforts at the state level, right? That are organized in archival sources like Department of Transportation, or if you have an EPI work group dashboard or something really beautiful and fancy. And then sometimes we have primary data that we're able to collect too, if you're a regional approach or you're working with, a very established evaluator. And this is not a training about data collection. This is not a training about evaluation. But we are going to be talking about some of those tenets in session 3 and how they're important for your implementation phase as well. But for today, talking about the problems, capturing a specific problem statement will do you wonders. So we have an example problem statement up here on the board. And Dave, actually, if you'll just click for the animation that falls under this box, this is how you get to your problems, right? And you identify what it is your particular program is going to hone in on. You're using criteria like magnitude, how large and how imposing the problem is in your community. Is it a problem over time that's getting worse? How severe, right? What are the repercussions of this problem? Is it resulting in mortality, significant morbidity, other drivers? And then comparing it to other problems that you know about in the community, right? So those are the 4 criteria, and those are also talked about in the Substance Abuse Prevention Skills Training, the SAPST. But those criteria really help you hone in on what problem to address. This problem statement is an example of a very concise, targeted one that will guide your efforts. So we wanted to give this to you when you're looking at, guidance from your funder, when you're looking at grant proposal or grant RFAs or notice of funding opportunities, NOFOs that come out. They will oftentimes have a problem statement in there. So pull that out, put it in your logic model, and then move on to the next box. Let's go over there. So intervening variables, we're using this term here because it most accurately represents what goes on in this box. But I also want you to be thinking about intervening variables as risk and protective factors. All we mean here is something that's present in the community that you could intervene upon. And hopefully that drives some form of change, right? So we're talking about risk and protective factors most of the time in prevention, and what we can intervene upon to change those, right? Either increasing protection or decreasing risk. Sometimes your intervening variables in your initiative, they also need to be prescribed for you, right? Your funder has already conducted a needs assessment and they say that these are the 5 risk and protective factors we want this particular initiative to focus in on. But oftentimes you have to find your own intervening variables. You need to do the planning, and your assessment needs to cover what those risk and protective factors are in the community. So you're going to want to know your data sources, obviously, and we are more than happy to provide some more resources to help you there. The vast majority of states across the country have some kind of biennial youth survey, meaning it's implemented every other year, reaching usually between 6th to 12th grade students. Sometimes those grades change, right? And I know several states in your region, in your HHS region, have excellent biennial youth surveys. And that's very helpful when you're pulling out youth risk and protective factors for youth. There's other data sources when you're dealing with slightly older young adults, for instance, or older youth, and very, very young youth. There's some other indicators that can be used as well, and parent data to sub that into. This is an example of a concise intervening variable statement. You're going to want multiple intervening variable statements in your logic model because we know multiple risk and protective factors contribute to a single problem, right? So Dave, if you'll just click the slide, the animation kind of shows how you prioritize your intervening variables. The intervening variables that you choose to intervene upon need to be really important, right? We know they're contributing to the problem, and they need to be changeable. You need to be able to have the capacity to move the needle a little bit. Some risk and protective factors are frankly just too far out of reach to impact, right? There are too many contextual pieces, infrastructure, funding, they're too big to address. So we want to set your programs up for success and set your strategy selection up for success. So here, question in the chat box, please, 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 check out this intervening variable statement. And I want you to type in the chat box what you think the intervening variable is. So nearly 2 out of 5 youth surveyed report that when they drink alcohol, it was given to them. What does that tell us the intervening variable is in the chat box? Social availability. Emma, yes. Suppliers, ease of access, great. Great, great, exactly. So alcohol is socially accessible, on a pretty easy level, and that's how youth are getting their alcohol, right? So sometimes it's framed differently in those surveys that we access, but you can reduce that down to ease of social access. Okay, let's move on to the next part of our logic model. So intervening variables are helpful and they tell a very, very important part of the story, but not everything. And we oftentimes are left asking more questions, right? Okay, if youth can get their alcohol easily, how? Is it because parents are working multiple jobs and they're not monitoring their kids, they're not available in the home? Is this only happening in one area or region of our community? Is this happening in party settings, right? So we have all these questions that we need to ask that come out when we get to our contributing factor section, right? We're asking, but why now is this intervening variable an issue? And how is it taking place? How exactly is it taking place? So with your contributing factors, you're focusing on what's really prevalent and really enduring in the community. And Dave, if you'll click that, yes, perfect. And you're also, great, and then one more, click, excellent. And then you're also focusing on whatever can give you more detail. So again, let's walk through a little example. We'll get over to the next slide here. And we're going to click through all those animations. Contributing factors ask something like this. If we know social access to alcohol is how most of our youth are getting their alcohol, then why is that factor happening in our community? And how exactly? So it's explaining, this is the context that is explaining those intervening variables. And they're going to give you way more direction, right? How you address, go ahead and keep clicking through, Dave, perfect. How you address any one of these contributing factors, right? Kids taking alcohol from home, kids accessing alcohol at parties near college campuses. How you address any of those is going to differ substantially from the different ones. And it looks like it's kind of cut off on the bottom. I apologize if you guys cannot see that, but it says older relatives are allowing or providing the alcohol. So you see how each one of those is going to tweak how you approach this intervening variable. So a very important piece of our logic model. And frankly, this component is missing from the SAPS piece. when you're going through logic model training. So keep in mind, contributing factors different from intervening variables. Okay, let's go to the last slide of this section. Once we have all that info, once we have a wonderful needs assessment complete and we can answer these questions and we can fill out these boxes, then it's time to start doing some digging. Then we have a better picture of what it is we're trying to impact, right? And this piece is what this series is all about: selecting the appropriate evidence-based prevention strategies. And you do that based on how well your risk and protective factors will be addressed by the strategy. So conceptual fit, how well a particular strategy fits those risk and protective factors you need to change, and how well your capacity, your 4 Rs, will enable this evidence-based prevention program to be implemented effectively. Okay, so multiple things that you have to consider here. We are going to use this logic model format when we do our breakout group activity, coming to you very, very soon. So Dave is also going to share some links that help in building your logic model use capacity, right? So if you have any other, if you have a driving desire to familiarize yourself and take some more training, see some more resources on building up logic models, we definitely want to make sure you know that that's available and accessible. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. I'm going to pass it over to Dave.
Wonderful. Yes, logic models. They they really are ever so important when it comes to identifying and selecting your EBPs. They really are a wonderful tool and a wonderful roadmap. Uh, we had to spend some time talking on. We couldn't talk about selecting EBPs without talking about logic models. Check out those resources. There's a PDF I put in there as well from the PTTCs that you can download. You can search the PTTC website for logic models as well to come up with a whole bunch of great resources. All right, so next up, what's got to happen for intervention success? And yes, I continued the trend of putting pictures of cute animals in the slides from session 1 as well, because that picture just makes me smile. I had to put it in there. But all right, so what's got to happen? Well, there are 2 pillars, and the first one being the appropriate selection of your program policy or practice. If you select an appropriate strategy, you're going to set yourself up for success. Absolutely. And where's that start? Oh, logic model. That's where that starts. And when you want to consider its effectiveness, when you're looking at these strategies, you want to take time to really unpack the evidence itself. Does it have strong evidence? Is it aligned with the substance misuse related problem? What about our identified population as well? You want to look at all of that evidence to see how robust, how strong, because interventions with evidence of effectiveness, they have those experts that have come together to identify, to analyze, interpret, and determine that those strategies, those programs do in fact have documented effectiveness. So they're going to be included in your federal registries. They're going to be in those peer-reviewed journals. And you could also find them just with documented effectiveness that's supported by other sources of information. And something like the intervention is based on a theory of change that is documented in a clear, logical, or conceptual model, or the intervention is similar in content and structure to interventions that appear in the registries or peer-reviewed. Or even the intervention can be supported by documentation that it has been effectively implemented in the past at multiple times in a manner attentive to the scientific standards of evidence, and with results that really do show that consistent pattern of that credible positive effects. So you want to really make sure that it is evidence-based and it is effective. So that's the first stop. That is the first part of the pillar. But you also want to think about its fit. And during session 1, and actually in the recap, I hinted at the conceptual fit and practical fit. So to dive into those, conceptual fit, it's when the strategy best aligns with it. You've got your problem statements. I forgot about the animations. They always get me. All right. So does it actually, in fact, address those contributing factors? What you've identified, your EBPs. Conceptually, if on paper in those registries it says, hey, it addresses these contributing factors, house parties near a college campus, or older relatives allowing or providing access, then conceptually, that EBP does fit. So that's the conceptual fit. Think about it just on paper. Does it say it will actually address these contributing factors, the ones that you have identified in your logic model? When it comes to practical fit, this is where you're going to start to pull support from your stakeholders. You're going to be thinking about your 4 R's. Are you able to? Are you allowed to? Are there any restrictions from your funder or those requirements? Is it feasible? Is it doable? And does it align with your other prevention strategies, that big picture? When you're able to align your strategies, that comprehensive approach, you can create a bigger positive change. Also leads to better sustainability as well. Do you have the readiness among your stakeholders to support it, which will also help foster and lead to sustainability? And practical fit, also you have to address, is it culturally relevant? Is it respectful and culturally responsive to our community? So as you look at the contributing factors that we've been working with, then you start to identify your strategies. You think about the conceptual fit and the practical fit. So from your logic model, you're identifying some EBPs. You're looking at their evidence to see their evidence of effectiveness. Then that's leading into conceptual fit. Does it actually address the contributing factors that we have identified in that logic model? And then we look at your 4 R's to determine that practical fit. Do we have the resources? Do we have the readiness as well to implement this EBP? And thus, that brings you to your best fit options. Nicole, anything you want to add there that I may have left out?
I don't think so. I think we're ready to think about this a little bit more in our groups.
All right. So let's go find some EBPs. What we're going to do, we're going to put you into 5 breakout rooms, and we've got Google Docs for you, and it's a case study. I'll zoom in a little bit. So we've got, everybody's going to have the exact same case study, and got your instructions. Want you to go into your breakout room. Want you to read through this case study here. This is the description. The county is Applegate County. Won't tell you why we went with that, but
I think I was craving bacon. I don't know.
maybe. Oh, all right. So you're going to read through. You're going to talk about what you're taking away from this case study here, what you see. Then we've got the beautiful logic model right here. And we've got a table right below. So as a group, talk about what is the problem? What are the consequences? Type those right here on this Google Doc. Same thing for those intervening variables, contributing factors, and then each breakout room is going to be assigned a different repository to identify some EBPs. So as a group, somebody will need to pull up the Google Doc, type in here, and then as a group, try to identify one EBP. If you can get 2 or 3, even better. And then when you come back to the large group, we're going to report out by breakout room and invite you to first share a little bit about what you had identified and then why you chose the EBP that you did, and just a little bit about that repository, that resource that you used to identify those EBPs. All right. And Nicole, did I leave anything out while I set up the breakout rooms?
I think just 2 big things, or no, not big things, but one, have fun with this. This is an opportunity. If you're not familiar with the EBP repository source that we provide you, if you're not familiar with it, it's a great time to play around, search, see how you could use this back in your own prevention program if you have an opportunity, especially in thinking about grant writing season. That's going to be here before you know it, writing for some more program expansion. But also there is a nice little handy checklist that our SAMHSA guidance document, which we'll be sharing with you in the chat box at the end of the session, also provides. So if you scroll down inside that Google Doc that each group has, you have a nice little checklist to double check that the strategy you select fits conceptually, fits practically, and there's evidence of effectiveness, right? Now we're shortcutting this a little bit for you so that you know all of these programs are relatively effective, okay? Because you're going to a repository that's already done some of that vetting for you. But have fun, learn some stuff, and then come back and tell us about it.
All right, so the Google Docs are in there. So when you go to the breakout rooms, I'll tell you what rooms you're in. Here are those check boxes Nicole was talking about as well, so you can walk right through this list. All right, so we're gonna put you in there for 15 minutes. Room 1, if you're in there with Ryan Anderson or Hannah Tackett, you guys are in room 1. If you are with Claudia and Cassidy and Paige, you are in room 2. Room 3 is Alice and Emma and Julia and Chris. Room 4, actually, room 4, we got some folks coming in. Stand by. Room 4 is Delaney, Melissa, and MONUM. And room 5 is Carrie, Caitlin, and Linda. So grab the corresponding Google Doc from the chat box. And any last questions before we send you to breakouts? All right, and we will be making the rounds. Additionally, there is the Ask for Help feature in Zoom. It'll be in the bottom right of your Zoom control. So if you do have a question, please don't hesitate to use that as well. And we'll see you in the breakouts. If you want to hit record, right on cue. Groovy. So gave you a little extra time in breakouts because some folks were at different places in the process, but let's just hear from each group on sort of what you uncovered and what EBPs, what prevention strategies you selected, why you selected them, and then just a little bit about the resource that you had where you found those strategies. And I've got group 1 up here first. So group 1, if you don't mind going first.
Would you just like a walkthrough of everything we put down?
That would be perfect. Yes.
So I don't know if everyone had the same scenario. Our problem was underage drinking, and a big consequence of that was a lot of young people were getting into fatal alcohol-related car accidents. We learned in the community that there's an ease of access and social availability. People are able to get it from friends, families, or at parties. Contributing factors to that were among those who, the youth that did drink, there were higher family conflict levels and lower feelings of attachment to the community. There was also a very understaffed law enforcement agency in the community, which made it kind of hard to enforce things. And then a lot of teenagers were partying at vacant homes that were in our community. So we decided to either go with maybe a mass media campaign or a social host liability. I think we leaned more towards the mass media campaign because thinking about the enforcement of the social host liability type thing, if the police department is really understaffed, that might be kind of hard to do. Yeah, I don't know if you want any more information.
Yeah. So where, tell us a little bit about Wyoming Prevention Depot, where you found your strategies.
So it took us to, oh gosh, let me pull it up here. So this was kind of a cool thing because the way that Wyoming Prevention Depot does it is that you can choose a substance and then you can also pick a casual area. So you pick your substance, whatever it is, or your priority area, and then you pick kind of those intervening variables. So for example, if community norms were a big thing, you would click that as well. So you can go through all of those, and then based on your search, it gives you different, yeah, so just like you have right there, for example, like if you're looking to find the best fit EVP for your community, you can go through and view them. Like if you were to click on one of them, it would give you more information about what it is, and then discussions about how it's effective and then where it's referenced from or what its evidence base is.
Thank you very much, Ryan and Group 1. Nicole, any thoughts before we go to the next group?
Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
That was great. This is a wonderful tool to look at environmental strategies. Those are not always found in repositories of evidence-based programs, but that Wyoming's tool and then Education Development Center has a nice little online toolkit as well. So particular to environmental strategies. Thanks, Group 1.
Yes, and I'll get all the links to these resources to Steve so he can send those out with the slides as well, and another PDF resource we'll share. We'll load you up, Alice, with resources and links. All right, so Group 2, would you do us the honor, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I didn't notice the link there for the references because I had problems pulling up the study, but we had pretty much the same scenario as Group 1. Problem was the underage drinking, which resulted in fatal car accidents. For as our intervening factors, we had that there was the state responsible cells. So with the local business owners in the school district was already providing prevention material to in the schools. So our contributing factors to the underage drinking was access to alcohol from older friends as well as family. With the prevention strategies, we decided that we would continue with prevention materials in school, attend community and school events to share information with parents regarding underage drinking problem in the community, as well as provide a media campaign to spread awareness.
All right. And you said you had problems getting the link up,
Well,
folks?
I didn't.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
we didn't recognize that there was a link. We saw it, but we didn't click on it. And we kind of just talked about it and made sure that we completed the logic model. So that was something that we missed during our session.
Well, y'all rocked it. You rocked it. I just want to show the audience this is another great resource for identifying individual strategies as well. So you can search as far as geography, the age, where you're going to implement it, the problem you want to address. There's all the different filters here as well that you can search. So we'll include this one, of course, in the follow-up resources as well. Any thoughts, Nicole? Another.
Yeah, what I love about this, your strategy selection, is that you've got a multi-component approach here. You've got multiple strategies selected, which is imperative for a prevention program to work, right? You can't do any one strategy. You need to have multiple. So that's great. I do want to just point out on the logic model, you're going to want to swap a couple things. So the intervening variables section, that's the part that's really talking about your risk and protective factors here in the community. So that piece might be family conflict, kids accessing alcohol, right? Kids have access by friends and family. Just swap that over to that section. And then the responsible beverage server and school district prevention material, those are really capacity pieces, right? Those are things that you have available for your prevention strategy. So you can tuck those into your prevention strategy column, but just inviting you to kind of revisit the logic model piece and making sure you have them in the right sections. You guys did a great job putting together a multi-pronged approach. That's key.
Multi-pronged, comprehensive approach. I dig it. All right, group 3. What do you have for us?
So in ours, what we identified as the problem was minors involved in alcohol-related fatal car crashes. Our intervening variables were ease of social access, low attachment to the community, and family conflict. Contributing factors were the retail alcohol sales increased over the pandemic, understaffed sheriff's office, family conflict, accessing alcohol during parties and homes, and provided alcohol by family members at home. And then our prevention strategies were to use alcohol EDU in the local school districts as they were on board, and we had a grant to fund that, and then a social host ordinance. And we found those in the college drinking prevention guide with College AIM. And it has just a great printable guide that you can use, but then also it had grids that you could look at that helped you to determine what would be affordable and effective. And they were for individual and environmental strategies.
Yes, indeed. All right, group 3, Nicole. Thoughts on
Love
that
it.
one?
Just love. And College AIM is wonderful. I do want to point out there's also a SAMHSA resource, and we'll share that in a bit here, that has strategies for young adults, not necessarily in college. But what's cool about that resource at the beginning is they talk about strategies to implement with younger youth whose long-term impacts protect them in young adulthood from substance use. So if you, for instance, got a grant that was particularly targeting young adults, right? You could, in a roundabout way, justify having an additional component or, one of your components target younger youth, right? Feeding two birds with one stone, right? Because the impact is long lasting into young adulthood. So well done, group 3. Very, very well done.
All right, group 4. Group 4. Would you do us the honor? Yeah, Melissa.
I'll go ahead. So we had the same case study as everybody, so I won't really go over much of that, just, the increase of fatality crashes involving minors. The variables were conflict at home, adults providing alcohol to minors. Some of the protective factors were that the school was supportive of the prevention efforts, but another risk factor was the minors not feeling attached to their community. So we kind of made up some reasons about why there was conflict at home. Pandemic stress was mentioned because alcohol sales are increasing. Likely the adults are consuming more alcohol, which could potentially increase the conflict at home and then affect the parents' mental health, which could also be a contributing factor to that conflict at home, which then would maybe also contribute to why the adults are providing alcohol to the minors. And then also just differences in generational views on use of alcohol as some of those contributing factors. So we selected the practice profile school-based brief intervention for substance use among youths. The reason that we selected that is because the program could be housed in the school. If parents are having conflict at home, it's not really likely that they would be willing to participate in maybe like a family-based program. So having it housed at the school, the students would be easily accessible. And then they could also bring in other members of the community that are supportive, like the sheriff's office was supportive of it, but they're understaffed, but the sheriff could potentially come and do a presentation on the law, those types of things. So we just thought that seemed like that would be the most the broadest reach, that type of intervention strategy with the community composition and the issues that they're facing.
Right. And where did you find those?
The Department of Justice Crime Solutions Matrix.
All right. And here's what that looks like. We'll give feedback later. All right. So again, another way to search, all kinds of different filters that you can use here. And we'll include this link. All right. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
Very well done. Excellent. And I love the inferences made, right? Adding those additional details and really thinking through, given the community context, what might work and what might be the lowest hanging fruit that you could grab onto and make juice. And you guys did a great job. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Let's hear from group 5. How or what did you all come up with?
I can jump in. So being the last group, just kind of following up on the other groups and what they provided. I think our prevention strategy was most similar to group 4 based on what was presented at the resource that we used, which is Blueprints. And Blueprints has their own certification process for evidence-based programs. So they give ratings on different programs, and kind of like some of the other databases, those 4 bars show different ways of searching for evidence-based programs. Interestingly, if you select alcohol as a problem behavior outcome, it doesn't come up with any on the top navy blue bar. But we looked at target population, thinking, yeah, so if you select alcohol, maybe I'd selected multiple things at the same time. Okay, so if you look at early adolescence or late adolescence or childhood, there's a number of programs that show up. One that a lot of us are pretty familiar with, which is life skills training. So that seemed like a logical selection based on just the ways that all the information fit together, and what was available here, which is mostly like curriculum based evidence-based practices rather than environmental strategies.
All right. Thank you, Carrie. And group 5. Nicole, thoughts on group 5?
Excellent. Excellent work.
Nice.
And isn't it so interesting how every group is coming up with different strategies because of the repository that we source to you? So that really underscores, there's excellent sources out there for EBPs, but they're multiple. So you got to look at multiple places if you really want to be thinking about the very best fit strategy for your program. Well done, group 5.
And quick note before we move on, if you want to save this Google Doc, you can come up to File and Download. You can download it as a Word doc, PDF, all these different formats, or you can just make a copy of it and save it to your own personal Google Drive folder so you have it and can come back and use it in the future as well. All right.
Can you put the link into the thing again for whatever that was?
For the Google
That
Docs?
document that you're talking about.
Oh, yes, Nicole, the link that Nicole put in. Yeah.
Oh, no, for all the Google Docs.
Oh, the Google Docs.
Before the breakout. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Since chat box looks like it cleared for some people.
Oh, Zoom is just being wonky today. All right. Oh, gosh, yes, it'll take me a moment. I just tried to copy paste and it did something very weird and scary. I will get those in there in just a moment. But in the meantime, what happens after we search for EBPs? What do we do? Nicole, can you help me out?
I don't know. I want to take a swim with this dog. No, so, after we do our searching, ideally we come up with, let's go over to the next slide. We come up with a best fit situation. We can go right into adoption. This is the ideal sent from the heavens situation that you could find yourself in, right? You find a perfectly appropriate EBP, you have the capacity, right? The resources, the readiness, your grant restrictions allow the EBP. All of those components in the 4Rs are there and you can implement. That is not the most common situation. Although as more and more research is coming out and these repositories, these systematic reviews are happening, this becomes more likely, right? The more programs that we know are evidence-based out there and the better we build that base, the more we're going to have adoption situations. The most common is adaptation. And many of you who are on here today probably have experienced this yourself. You came across, however means, you came across a strategy that wasn't perfect, but it was what you could do. It was what your capacity allowed. It was prescribed to you by your funder. It was what was the most accessible and what you knew how to implement given the timeline you were working with. When you find a viable but imperfect option, you do need to be considering what kind of adaptations to make so that it works for your community while also balancing fidelity. And we're going to be talking a lot about fidelity and adaptations in the next section and a little bit on fidelity for the remainder of today. But adaptation is most common. And then of course, innovation, which we want to welcome you to be thinking about. This is when you don't find a good fit, right? You don't find something you can adapt. You don't find something you can just roll out and adopt right away. So you have to be creative. You have to think about what evidence is existing out there and how you might innovate and create something specific to your community for your particular focus population. This happens a lot with smaller communities, rural areas, populations that are historically underserved and marginalized. So, don't despair, there are solutions. And the next slide kind of sums up what actions to take when you find yourselves in these situations. If there's not an EBP that directly addresses your priority problem or factor, then look for EBPs that address the same priority or factors, but in a different problem. So some of you who've been around for the block for a minute in prevention have heard the term prevention is prevention is prevention, meaning the way we do underage drinking prevention is very similar to how we do prescription drug misuse prevention, to how we do marijuana misuse prevention, to how we do, right? So look at similar factors in a different problem. The next situation, if there's no EBPs for your group's focus population, then find EBPs that address, the same kind of problem or factors among a different population, or you can find a different priority problem in your focus population and see how those are being addressed. And once you find those kind of solutions, that's when you make the adaptation, right? That's when you have to look at the program, look at the practice you're selecting and make it fit your focus population. Okay, and then there's no EBPs that your community would accept. Then that's time when you need to reshift your focus away from implementation, get support from a technical assistance provider, get support from your funder, and saying, we really need to go back and spend a lot of effort in the capacity phase. We have got to build readiness. We need people to recognize this as a program. We need people to join our coalition or support us, tell us what they need and want, right? So you need to shift away from implementation and go back to capacity. Okay, and then of course, innovation is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity. If you find yourself in the situation where you need to create and you need to innovate, this is the time to customize. This is the time to contribute to the evidence base in prevention science and build, build capacity for the field in general. And we're going to talk about that more in September's session. So innovation is not scary, it's an opportunity. And there are many professionals and TA resources out there to help you with this. Okay, turning it over to Dave to wrap us up.
Yes, indeed. All right, y'all. I introduced you to the very first pillar, appropriate selection of evidence-based programs, policies, and practices coming from your logic model. That second pillar is right there, implementation fidelity. And Nicole's already hinted that we're going to really dig into this in our next session, which is September 8th, maybe. I'm lost without my calendar, but we'll get that in there as well. But implementation fidelity, here's what we're looking at. Fidelity is absolutely a pillar. This is the degree to which your program, your policy or practice is implemented or reproduced as it was prescribed, as the research says it should be done. And yep, another cute little dog I want to go hang out with there with that cake. But it is absolutely like baking a cake. Many of y'all may have heard that analogy before, but you don't want to tweak those core elements like the amount of flour or salt, because oh my goodness, you might just be giving that cake to the dog instead of eating it yourselves. But changing some of those non-essential elements, you can absolutely do that. And like it says on the slide, may even get an even better outcome. And now I'm ready for my afternoon snack. But also, before you implement, you want to really identify your fidelity checks. You want to think about this before you move to implementation. You want to figure out, how are you going to catch any inefficiencies? What are your quality improvement processes? How can you show your funders that you're going to do what you said you're going to do? How are you going to track those adaptations as well that you've made? And then identifying these fidelity checks ahead of time are absolutely going to help explain why the outcomes you achieved were stronger or weaker than intended. But the important part is be thinking about this before you implement, as you're still selecting, as you're still identifying your EBPs. And those core parts, I mentioned the cake recipe. You know, implementation fidelity is also strongly associated with the effectiveness. And like Nicole said, sometimes you're going to have to drift a little bit from the original design, the original delivery as well. That happens. But the need to modify those evidence-based interventions when they're implemented in a new setting is somewhere between common and universal. It's kind of right there in the middle, but can't help but emphasize enough the importance of fidelity and maintaining those core components as well. And those core components would be the content, the delivery mechanism, and the method. So making those meaningful adaptations while retaining the core components is the right way to really balance the real world fit and high fidelity. But those core components might not always be readily apparent. If you're not sure what those core components are of your selected EBP, go ahead and reach out to the developers or some of those other prevention practitioners that have worked with that EBP in the past or who have evaluated that EBP as well. Go out and get support. Ask some folks what those core components are. More often than not, though, the original developers are happy to help. And retaining those core components, you can also boost the effectiveness. Like I said, thinking about preserving that setting, maintaining that dosage, adding new content, not subtracting. And then think about those design or delivery changes with intention, with care, and get feedback from your community, your population that you're serving as well when you're considering making those adaptations. And we're getting close on time. Anything you want to throw in here, Nicole?
Just look forward to September 8th, where we can really break this down and show you how to use some tools and make your life a little bit easier.
Yes, so we are digging in even more to implementing with fidelity and talking about sustainability as well. So we've got 7 minutes left. What questions do you have? Feel free to use the chat as well as come off of mute.
I know from a logistics standpoint, there's been a lot of questions about slides and the links and the resources, and we'll package all those up, make sure everybody knows that those will be delivered to participants in follow-up.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Alice.
I'm just, I was literally just in a meeting this morning about writing a grant for a youth bureau program. And they were like, oh, we can't do life skills because it's too many lessons. It's, it's 14 or 20 lessons, this and that. So yet it is the evidence-based program that CADCA pushes at the conferences. And people are often like, health teachers are like, it's too many of my classes to take, to do in a health class. You're taking my curriculum away from me. So I was just wondering how, what comments you had with regard to things like that.
Yeah, so I've got a couple thoughts, but then I'll throw it to Nicole as well for some input. And I'm guessing there's folks in the audience as well that have worked with life skills. But my first, y'all, if Chad was here, prevention is better together. Go back to working on readiness, building that relationship with the schools, and look to see what burdens you can lift, you can help with for them. Then have a conversation about coming into their classroom with life skills curriculum.
Well, I do appreciate what you're saying, and having been a 12-year school board member, I have an excellent relationship with the schools. But there's often a disconnect between the policymakers, superintendents and principals, and actual implementers in classrooms. And the politics of that gets to be very, very challenging. And that's when evidence-based gets to be a little bit of a challenge, because I find educators are threatened by others suggesting evidence-based ways of giving lessons that they've been giving in their mind, how they want to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. What thoughts do you have, Nicole?
Yeah, so just having gone through this experience with former clients, former grantees before,
Thought so.
this is not uncommon, unfortunately. It really is. There's a disjoint that happens in our communities from understanding what really needs to happen to get an outcome versus thinking that you can just do some part of something and you'd get that outcome, right? So in many cases, there is an all or nothing line drawn in prevention. And unfortunately, it can be a little divisive and prohibitive. So if you can't win them over with life skills and you talk to the life skills developer, if there's any kind of adaptation that can be done to reduce to the core lessons, right, and streamline, in some cases, many developers out there, in fact, I know of, are willing to tell you which lessons are absolutely core that they believe will still get to that outcome, right? But if you do those and you take those steps and you still can't find a shorter, more concise version of the program, then I would take another look at what other programs are available. Sometimes there's other programs out there that are conducted over a longer period of time, but with really short snapshots, right? They don't take the full class period. It's only 15 minutes a week or something similar. So working closely with the developers, looking for alternatives, and then piggybacking on what Dave's saying, if you have any prepackaged materials or the developer has prepackaged materials to really sell the program, that can be huge. Sometimes if it's like not coming from you and coming from something that has a logo, right? It feels more official from the developer. Sometimes that can win people over too.
I also want to say that I think the prevention world needs to align itself better with the curriculum world in education. And like the CASTLE framework for social emotional learning and all emotional stuff and prevention need to sort of be merged more because prevention is separate than Castle. Castle is a school framework for social emotional learning. And, we have our strategic prevention framework and, all the prevention stuff. But I think that those models need to be brought together more because the kids are at the schools. So that's really where we can get the evidence-based programs to them most efficiently is in the schools.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Alice, I thought you were purposely setting me up for that. Together is better. Yes, we need to be working together better as well. Yes. I also think that that might make a great conversation for one of the upcoming communities of practice as well. Let's dig into that. What is life skills looking like for those that are implementing it? What are some of those barriers? How have they been able to align with the school-based approach to curriculum as well? Yeah.
And
A lot
like
of rich. Go ahead.
an example of an evidence-based program that adapted to a school schedule is that the youth and adult mental health first aid classes from the National Council. I'm actually a trainer for those, right? So the youth mental health first aid, they were like, it's 8 hours, it's 8 hours, it's 8 hours. It didn't work in a school time frame. So when they repurposed it with the new curriculum that they launched right when the pandemic happened, they made it a 6.5 hour class, which now fits into a school day. So schools can then train their educators on youth mental health first aid training, which is a key prevention strategy of getting youth connected to help, right? So that's a key prevention strategy. But that was something where the SEL group and prevention in schools, they recognized that barrier and they shortened the program to accommodate a school schedule.
Outstanding, outstanding. See, look at all the wisdom that's in the room here. And Steve, I just want to make sure you saw Paige's comment in the chat box as well. Hey, got a second vote for that. We are out of time, but folks, hope to see you September 8th, where we will dig into implementation with fidelity. We could even carry forward some of this conversation we were having with Alice as well into next session. And then also the ever so important sustainability. And Steve just dropped that link in the chat box for the post-event evaluation that is 100% anonymous. And it takes 2 or 3 minutes to actually complete. You can even scan this QR code with your cell phone to complete that as well. We would greatly appreciate your feedback because we are always wanting to learn and grow as well. Steve, last thoughts?
Oh, wonderful. I've enjoyed today. I'm glad that everyone was able to join us and get on successfully. Thank you to Nicole and Dave for being here and providing such a great training. And it sounds like not only do we have a follow-up on September the 8th, and we'll have a follow-up to today with a link and the resources and a reminder for September 8th, but sounds like we might have some topics of conversation for future discussion beyond that. So Dave and Nicole, let's put our thoughts together on what that might look like.
Sounds good to me. All right. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy this evening and have a wonderful remainder of this week. Take care, everyone.